The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April 1878, and Caroline Webb nearly missed it because she was too busy arguing with the grocer about the price of flour to notice the young messenger boy hovering near the doorway of Henderson's General Store in Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory. When she finally turned around, the boy thrust the yellow paper into her hands with such urgency that she fumbled her reticule, scattering coins across the wooden floorboards. "Miss Caroline Webb?" the boy asked, already backing toward the door. "Yes, that's me," she said, stooping to gather her scattered money while clutching the telegram. Her heart hammered against her ribs because telegrams meant news, and news was rarely good in her experience. The last telegram she had received informed her that her father's publishing house in Philadelphia had gone bankrupt, leaving her with nothing but debts and a teaching certificate she had earned against his wishes. She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers and read the neatly typed words twice before they made sense. A ranch owner named Jacob Hartley was requesting her services as a teacher for his ranch hands at the Double H Ranch, located 30 miles northwest of Santa Fe. The pay was generous, $50 a month plus room and board, and the position would begin as soon as she could arrange transportation. The telegram provided no other details, just an address where she could send her reply. Caroline stood in the middle of Henderson's store, aware that Mrs. Henderson and two other customers were watching her with undisguised curiosity. Santa Fe was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, and Caroline's business had been precarious for months. She had been surviving on the meager wages from tutoring the children of wealthy merchants, barely scraping together enough for rent on her tiny room above the seamstress shop. $50 a month was more money than she had seen in a year. She folded the telegram carefully and slipped it into her reticule. "Mr. Henderson," she called out, "I'll need to send a reply." 3 days later, Caroline found herself bouncing along a rutted dirt road in a wagon driven by a taciturn man named Pete, who claimed to work for Jacob Hartley. Pete had shown up at her boarding house before dawn, loaded her 2 trunks and 3 crates of books into the wagon bed, and offered her a hand up to the wooden seat without saying more than 10 words. Caroline tried to make conversation during the first hour of the journey, asking about the ranch and Mr. Hartley and the men she would be teaching. But Pete responded with grunts and single syllables until she gave up and focused on the landscape instead. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Red rock formations rose from the desert floor like ancient sentinels, and the sky stretched endlessly overhead, so blue it hurt to look at. Juniper trees dotted the hillsides, and in the distance, mountains painted purple by atmospheric haze created a dramatic backdrop. Caroline had grown up in Philadelphia, where buildings crowded together and streets teemed with people and noise. This vast emptiness both thrilled and terrified her. They stopped once to water the horses at a small creek, and Caroline took the opportunity to stretch her legs and eat some of the bread and cheese she had packed. Pete remained by the wagon, chewing tobacco and staring at the horizon. Caroline wondered if all the men at the Double H Ranch would be this communicative, and the thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. The sun was high overhead when the ranch finally came into view. Caroline had expected something small and rough, maybe a few buildings clustered together, but the Double H Ranch sprawled across a wide valley with an impressive array of structures. The main house was a large adobe building with a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings included a barn, a bunkhouse, a cookhouse, several storage sheds and corrals that held dozens of horses. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, small dark shapes against the golden grass. Pete drove the wagon straight to the main house and pulled the horses to a stop. Before Caroline could climb down, the front door opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch. Caroline's breath caught in her throat because Jacob Hartley was nothing like she had imagined. She had pictured an older man, perhaps a weathered rancher in his 50s or 60s, who had decided to improve his workers' education out of some philanthropic impulse. The man standing before her was perhaps 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell almost to his collar and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to reflect the sky itself. He wore work clothes, denim trousers, and a plain cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, but he carried himself with an authority that needed no fancy clothing to announce his status. "Miss Webb," he said, his voice deep and warm. "Welcome to the Double H. I'm Jacob Hartley." He stepped off the porch and approached the wagon, offering his hand to help her down. Caroline accepted his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. "Mr. Hartley, thank you for the opportunity. I'm eager to begin." "Pete, take Miss Webb's things to the teacher's cottage," Jacob said, not taking his eyes off Caroline. "Miss Webb, if you're not too tired from the journey, I'd like to show you around and introduce you to some of the men." "I'm not tired at all," Caroline lied, because her back ached from hours of bouncing on the hard wagon seat and dust coated her throat, but she did not want to appear weak or unprofessional. Jacob smiled slightly, as if he knew she was lying but appreciated the effort. "Let me show you the bunkhouse first. That's where the men sleep, but we've set up a separate building for your schoolroom. It used to be a storage shed, but we cleaned it out and added desks and a chalkboard." He led her across the compound, and Caroline was acutely aware of the ranch hands who stopped their work to watch her pass. She counted at least 15 men, most of them young, all of them staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, determined not to show any intimidation. The schoolroom was better than she had hoped. Someone had whitewashed the interior walls and installed 4 long tables with benches. A proper chalkboard hung on one wall and shelves stood ready for her books. Windows on 2 walls let in plenty of light, and a small pot-bellied stove in the corner would provide heat during colder months. "This is wonderful," Caroline said, genuine pleasure warming her voice. "I can work with this very well." "Good," Jacob said. He leaned against one of the tables, crossing his arms over his chest. "I should explain why I sent for a teacher. Most of my men can't read or write more than their own names, if that. Some of them have been cheated by merchants who know they can't read contracts or account books. Others want to write letters home to family but can't. I've tried to help where I can, but I'm not a teacher and I don't have the patience for it. I figured it was time to hire someone who knows what they're doing." Caroline felt a surge of respect for this rancher who cared enough about his workers to invest in their education. "How many students will I have?" 12 have agreed to attend lessons. Some of the older hands think they're too old to learn, and I won't force anyone. Classes will be in the evenings after supper since the men work during the day. "Is that acceptable?" "Perfectly acceptable," Caroline said. "When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow night, if you're ready. That'll give you today to settle in and organize your materials." Jacob pushed away from the table and headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Miss Webb, I should warn you that some of the men are going to be difficult. They're not used to taking instruction from a woman, and a few of them signed up for lessons because they think it's funny or because they want to cause trouble. If anyone gives you real problems, you let me know immediately." "I appreciate the warning, Mr. Hartley, but I assure you I can handle difficult students. I've been teaching for 5 years. Something flickered in Jacob's eyes, something that might have been amusement or admiration. "I don't doubt it, Miss Webb. Now let me show you where you'll be staying." The teacher's cottage was a small adobe structure set slightly apart from the other buildings, nestled beneath a large cottonwood tree. Inside, Caroline found a surprisingly comfortable space with a bed, a dresser, a table and chairs, and even a small bookshelf. Colorful woven rugs covered the packed earth floor and curtains hung at the windows. Someone had left fresh water in a pitcher and a vase of wildflowers on the table. "The cookhouse serves 3 meals a day," Jacob explained. "Breakfast at dawn, lunch at noon, dinner at sunset. You're welcome to eat there with everyone else, or Rosa can bring meals to you here if you prefer privacy." "I'll eat with everyone," Caroline said. She wanted to get to know the men she would be teaching, and isolating herself seemed like a poor way to start. Jacob nodded approvingly. "Dinner's in about 2 hours. I'll have someone come fetch you." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both casual and courtly, then left her alone. Caroline sat down on the bed and released a long breath. The mattress was stuffed with something soft, probably corn husks, and the pillow felt like heaven after the hard wagon seat. She was tempted to lie back and close her eyes, but she forced herself to stand and begin unpacking. Her books needed to be sorted, her clothes needed to be hung up, and she wanted to wash the dust from her face and hands before dinner. As she worked, she found her thoughts returning to Jacob Hartley. He was younger than she expected and considerably more attractive. His eyes were striking, but it was more than that. He had an intensity about him, a sense of coiled energy barely contained. When he looked at her, she felt like he was truly seeing her, not just glancing at her surface. It was disconcerting and thrilling in equal measure. Caroline shook her head firmly. She was here to work, not to develop foolish attractions to her employer. Jacob Hartley was paying her $50 a month to teach his ranch hands, and she intended to do exactly that with complete professionalism. She had learned long ago that mixing romantic feelings with employment led only to disaster. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a Mexican woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron. "Miss Webb, I'm Rosa, the cook, Mr. Hartley asked me to make sure you have everything you need." "Thank you, Rosa. Everything is wonderful. If you need anything, you just ask. I'll bring hot water for washing in the mornings, and I can do your laundry once a week." Rosa smiled warmly. "It's good to have another woman here." "I was getting tired of being surrounded by men all the time," Caroline laughed. "I imagine so. How long have you worked here?" 10 years, since Mr. Hartley's father was still alive. "Jacob, he's a good man, a fair boss. You'll like working for him." Rosa glanced back toward the main house. "I better get back to the kitchen. Dinner will be ready soon, and those men eat like locusts." After Rosa left, Caroline finished unpacking and changed into a fresh dress, a simple brown cotton with a white collar. She brushed the dust from her hair and repinned it into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, then studied her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser. At 26, she was considered past the prime age for marriage by Philadelphia standards, but she had never been particularly interested in marriage anyway. She had wanted independence, a career, a life of her own choosing. Teaching gave her that, even if it meant living on a remote ranch in New Mexico territory. A young ranch hand, barely 20, came to escort her to the cookhouse as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The cookhouse was a long building with tables arranged in rows and a kitchen at one end where Rosa and another woman worked over a massive stove. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread made Caroline's stomach growl audibly. The men were already gathering, talking and laughing as they found seats. The noise level dropped noticeably when Caroline entered, and once again she felt the weight of their stares. She held her head high and followed the young ranch hand to a table near the front of the room. Jacob stood and gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Miss Webb, please join me." She sat, aware that every eye in the room was on her. Jacob cleared his throat and the room fell completely silent. "Men, this is Miss Caroline Webb. She's come all the way from Santa Fe to teach reading and writing to anyone who wants to learn. Classes start tomorrow night after dinner, right here in the cookhouse. I expect everyone to treat Miss Webb with complete respect. Anyone who causes problems will answer to me." "Understood," a chorus of "yes, sir," and nodding heads answered him. Jacob sat down, and the noise level gradually returned to normal as the men began eating. Rosa and her assistant brought platters of food to the tables: roasted beef, beans, fresh bread, and vegetables. Caroline filled her plate and ate hungrily, suddenly aware of how little she had eaten during the long journey. "How do you like your cottage?" Jacob asked, cutting into his meat. "It's lovely, much nicer than I expected. Thank you for the flowers." "That was Rosa's doing, not mine," Jacob admitted. "But I'm glad you're comfortable. If you need anything, just let me know." "Actually, I do have a question. You mentioned 12 men signed up for lessons. Will you be attending as well?" Jacob's fork paused halfway to his mouth, and for a moment, something guarded crossed his face. "No, Miss Webb, I already know how to read and write. My mother made sure of that before she died." "I'm sorry about your mother," Caroline said softly. "It was a long time ago." Jacob's tone made it clear the subject was closed. He turned his attention back to his food, and Caroline did the same, though she could not help stealing glances at him throughout the meal. After dinner, several of the ranch hands approached her with shy greetings and questions about what she would be teaching. Caroline answered each one patiently, feeling more optimistic about her students. They seemed genuinely interested, even if some were clearly nervous about their lack of education. That night, alone in her cottage, Caroline lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Horses whinnied in the distance, and someone played a harmonica somewhere near the bunkhouse. The night air smelled of sage and dust and something else she could not identify, something wild and free. She thought about Jacob Hartley and the way his eyes had shuddered when she mentioned his mother. There was pain there, old but still sharp. She wondered what other secrets he carried behind that intense blue gaze. The next day passed quickly. Caroline spent the morning organizing her books and preparing lesson plans, deciding to start with the alphabet and basic phonics. Some of her students might know more than that, but she needed to establish a baseline. In the afternoon, she walked around the ranch, getting her bearings and watching the men work. They were breaking horses in one corral, and Caroline stood at the fence watching as Jacob worked with a young stallion, speaking in a low, steady voice while the animal danced and snorted. Jacob moved with a grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He never rushed, never forced, just maintained steady pressure until the horse began to settle and accept his presence. Caroline found herself mesmerized by the display, by the patience and skill involved. When Jacob finally glanced up and caught her watching, she felt heat flood her cheeks and quickly turned away. That evening, after dinner, 12 men filed into the cookhouse and took seats at the tables. Caroline stood at the front of the room, a piece of chalk in her hand and her heart beating faster than it should. This was not her first time teaching adults, but it was her first time in such an isolated, male-dominated environment. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, pleased that her voice came out steady and confident. "My name is Caroline Webb, and I'm here to help you learn to read and write. I don't care how much or how little you know right now. Everyone starts somewhere, and there's no shame in learning. The only rule in this classroom is respect. You respect me, you respect each other, and you respect the process of learning. Can everyone agree to that?" A murmur of assent rippled through the room. Caroline smiled and turned to the chalkboard. "Let's begin with the alphabet." The first lesson went better than expected. Most of the men knew at least some of their letters, though few could recite the entire alphabet correctly. Caroline worked with them patiently, going over each letter and its sound, writing words on the chalkboard, and having them copy onto slates she had brought. The men were attentive and hardworking, even those who struggled. One man in particular caught her attention. His name was Tom, and he sat in the back row with his arms crossed and a skeptical expression on his weathered face. He was older than the others, probably in his 40s, and he did not pick up the slate or make any effort to participate. When Caroline approached him and asked if he needed help, he grunted and looked away. "Tom, I can't help you if you won't try," Caroline said quietly, crouching down so she was at his eye level. "Don't need help," Tom muttered. "Don't need to read. Been getting along fine for 43 years without it." "Then why are you here?" Tom's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. "Boss said we should come. Mr. Hartley isn't forcing anyone to attend. If you don't want to be here, you're free to leave." Caroline kept her voice gentle but firm, But if you're staying, I expect you to participate. Tom stared at her for a long moment, then slowly picked up the slate. Fine, show me what to do. Caroline spent extra time with Tom that evening, and by the end of the lesson, he had successfully copied the entire alphabet. When she praised his work, she saw a flash of pride in his eyes before he ducked his head and mumbled something that might have been thank you. After the students left, Caroline cleaned the chalkboard and organized the slates for the next lesson. She was tired but satisfied. The first lesson was always the hardest, and this one had gone well despite her worries. That was impressive. Caroline turned to find Jacob leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. She had not heard him enter. "Were you watching?" she asked. "For a bit. I wanted to make sure no one was giving you trouble." Jacob pushed away from the doorframe and walked into the room. "You handled Tom well. He's a stubborn old cuss, but he's got a good heart." "He just needed a little encouragement," Caroline said. She set down the chalk and brushed dust from her hands. "Your men are good students, Mr. Hartley. I think we'll make excellent progress." "I hope so." "And please call me Jacob. Mr. Hartley was my father and he's been dead 5 years. I'm still not used to the title." "Then you must call me Caroline," she said, then immediately wondered if that was too familiar. But Jacob smiled, and the warmth of that smile made her pulse quicken. "Caroline," he repeated, as if testing the name. "It suits you, strong but graceful." The compliment caught her off guard, and she felt heat rising in her cheeks again. "Thank you. I should get back to my cottage. It's been a long day." "I'll walk you," Jacob said. Before she could protest that it was unnecessary, he had taken her elbow and was guiding her toward the door. They walked in comfortable silence across the compound. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the ranch and turning everything into shades of black and white. Stars blazed overhead in numbers Caroline had never seen in the city, so many they seemed to blur together into rivers of light. "It's beautiful here," Caroline said softly. "I've never seen so many stars." "One of the benefits of living so far from civilization," Jacob said. "No city lights to drown them out." He paused outside her cottage door. "Caroline, I want to thank you for coming here. I know it's not easy, leaving everything familiar and traveling to a remote ranch to teach a bunch of rough cowboys. But it means a lot to the men, and it means a lot to me." "It's my job," Caroline said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were not quite true. This was already feeling like more than just a job. Jacob reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so unexpected and intimate that Caroline froze. His fingers brushed her cheek, and she felt the touch like a spark of electricity. "Good night, Caroline," Jacob said, his voice rough. "Good night, Jacob." She slipped inside her cottage and closed the door, leaning against it with her heart pounding. What was happening? She had been at the ranch for barely 2 days, and already she was developing feelings for Jacob Hartley. This was dangerous, foolish, and completely unprofessional. She needed to maintain boundaries, to remember that she was here to work, not to fall in love with her employer. But as she changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, Caroline could still feel the ghost of Jacob's touch on her cheek, and she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her in the moonlight. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Caroline taught lessons every evening except Sunday, and her students made steady progress. Most of them could now write their names and read simple words. Some of the younger men picked up the material quickly and were already moving on to more complex texts. Even Tom, despite his initial resistance, was proving to be a dedicated student. During the days, Caroline explored the ranch and the surrounding countryside. Jacob had given her permission to use one of the gentler horses, a gray mare named Silver, and Caroline spent her mornings riding through the valley. She discovered a creek where cottonwoods grew thick and birds sang in the branches, and she made it her favorite spot for reading and thinking. Jacob sought her out regularly, though he was always careful to maintain propriety. He would stop by the schoolroom to check on her lessons, or join her for dinner in the cookhouse, or encounter her on one of her rides and accompany her for a while. They talked about everything and nothing, Books, the ranch, the territory, their pasts. Caroline learned that Jacob had inherited the double H from his father, who had built it from nothing. Jacob's mother had died when he was 12, and his father had followed 10 years later, leaving Jacob to run the ranch alone at the age of 22. "Did you ever want to do anything else?" Caroline asked one afternoon. They were sitting by her favorite creek, letting the horses graze while they rested in the shade. "Besides ranching, I mean." Jacob considered the question, his eyes distant. "When I was young, I wanted to be a lawyer. My mother encouraged it. She wanted me to go to college back east to have a different life than this." He gestured at the surrounding landscape. "But then she died, and my father needed help with the ranch, and that was that. After a while, I realized I loved this life. It's hard work, but it's honest work, and it's mine." "Do you ever regret not going to college?" "Sometimes," Jacob admitted. "Mostly I regret not having more education. I can read and write well enough, but my mother died before she could teach me much beyond the basics. I've tried to learn on my own, but it's difficult without a proper teacher." Caroline sat up straighter, an idea forming. "I could teach you." Jacob turned to look at her, surprise evident on his face. "What?" "I could give you lessons, the same way I'm teaching your ranch hands. We could work on reading comprehension, writing skills, maybe some literature and poetry." "If you're interested, that is." For a long moment, Jacob did not respond. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious expression into something boyish and eager. I'd like that very much." They agreed to meet 3 mornings a week in the schoolroom, early before the heat of the day made work uncomfortable. Their first lesson was the following Monday, and Caroline found herself more nervous than she had been for her first lesson with the ranch hands. Teaching Jacob felt different, more personal. She wanted him to succeed, wanted to give him the education his mother had dreamed of for him. Jacob arrived exactly on time, freshly washed and carrying a cup of coffee. He sat at one of the tables, looking both eager and slightly embarrassed. "I feel like a schoolboy again," he said with a rueful laugh. "Don't be embarrassed," Caroline said. "Learning is a lifelong process. Now let's start by assessing where you are. I'd like you to read this passage aloud." She handed him a book of essays, open to a piece about the nature of democracy. Jacob read haltingly at first, stumbling over unfamiliar words, but as he continued, his voice grew stronger and more confident. His comprehension was good, and when Caroline asked him questions about what he had read, he provided thoughtful answers. "You're better than you think," Caroline said. "Your foundation is solid, we just need to build on it." Over the following weeks, they worked through increasingly complex texts. Jacob devoured everything Caroline gave him. Essays, poetry, philosophy, even novels. He had a particular fondness for Shakespeare, and they spent one memorable morning reading scenes from Romeo and Juliet aloud, with Caroline playing Juliet, and Jacob stumbling through Romeo's lines with a combination of earnestness and embarrassment that made her laugh. "I sound ridiculous," Jacob protested after mangling Romeo's famous balcony speech. "You sound like someone discovering the beauty of language," Caroline corrected. "That's not ridiculous at all. Try it again with more feeling this time." Jacob took a deep breath and began again. "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." His voice was rough but sincere, and when he looked at Caroline as he spoke the words, she felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the morning heat. Their lessons became the highlight of Caroline's days. She loved watching Jacob's mind open to new ideas, loved the discussions they had about what they read. Jacob was intelligent and thoughtful, with a natural curiosity that made teaching him a joy. But more than that, she simply loved being near him, loved the way he looked at her when she explained something, loved the sound of his laugh when she made a joke, loved the way he unconsciously leaned toward her when they sat side by side reading. She was falling in love with him, and the realization terrified her. One evening in early June, after her regular lesson with the ranch hands, Caroline was cleaning up when Tom approached her. The older cowboy had made remarkable progress over the past 2 months and could now read simple books and write basic letters. "Miss Caroline, I wonder if I could ask you something," Tom said, his weathered face serious. "Of course, Tom. What is it?" "It's about the boss, Jacob." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "I've worked for him 8 years now, and I've never seen him the way he is around you. He's different. Happier, I guess. I just wanted to say that I'm glad you're here. He deserves to be happy." Caroline felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Tom. That means a lot. He's a good man, Miss Caroline. Best boss I ever worked for. Fair and honest and caring. His father was a hard man, mean sometimes. But Jacob, he's different. He treats us like people, not just hired hands." Tom met her eyes directly. "I don't know what's happening between you two, and it's not my business. But if you care for him at all, don't break his heart. He's had enough pain in his life." After Tom left, Caroline sat alone in the empty cookhouse, thinking about his words. She did care for Jacob, far more than was wise or professional. But what could come of it? She was his employee. There was a power imbalance that made any romantic relationship complicated at best and exploitative at worst. And even if they could navigate that, what kind of life could they have together? Jacob was tied to this ranch, and Caroline had always dreamed of independence and adventure. But even as she thought these things, she knew she was making excuses. The truth was that she was falling in love with Jacob Hartley, and the only question that mattered was what she was going to do about it. The answer came sooner than she expected. It was a Saturday evening in mid-June, and Caroline had been at the ranch for nearly 2 months. There was no lesson that night, and after dinner, she decided to take a walk. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and the air was finally cooling after another hot day. She walked toward the corrals where several horses stood dozing in the evening light. As she approached, she saw Jacob leaning against the fence, watching the animals with an expression of contentment on his face. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and a smile spread across his face. "Caroline, I was hoping I'd see you tonight." "It's too beautiful an evening to stay inside," Caroline said, joining him at the fence. "The sunsets here are incredible." "One of the things I love most about this place," Jacob agreed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the colors shift and change across the sky. Then Jacob turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Caroline, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have said weeks ago, but I was afraid. I'm still afraid, but I can't keep pretending." Caroline's heart began to race. "What is it?" Jacob took a deep breath. "I'm in love with you. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you climb down from that wagon, all dusty and determined and beautiful. These past 2 months have been the happiest I've had in years, and it's because of you. I know this is complicated. I know I'm your employer and there's a power dynamic and 100 reasons why this is a bad idea. But I can't keep silent anymore. I love you, Caroline Webb, and I needed you to know." The words hung in the air between them, and Caroline felt tears prickling at her eyes. She had not realized how much she needed to hear those words until Jacob spoke them. "Jacob, she paused, trying to find the right words. "I love you too. I've been trying not to, trying to keep things professional, but it's impossible. You've become the most important person in my life." Jacob's face transformed with joy, and he reached out to cup her face in his hands. "Say that again." "I love you," Caroline whispered. Jacob kissed her then, a gentle, tender kiss that made Caroline's knees weak. His lips were soft and warm, and he tasted like coffee and promises. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you," Jacob said. "I know it's fast, and I know we still have things to figure out, but I want you to be my wife. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. Will you marry me, Caroline?" Caroline's heart soared even as her practical mind raised objections. They had only known each other 2 months. Marriage was a serious commitment. What about her career, her independence, her dreams of adventure? But then she looked into Jacob's eyes and saw everything she had ever truly wanted. love, partnership, a home, and a future. Teaching had given her independence, but it had never given her this feeling of belonging, of being cherished and understood and loved completely. "Yes," Caroline said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jacob swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, with a passion that made Caroline's blood sing in her veins. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. They decided to hold the wedding at the ranch in late July, giving them time to send invitations and make arrangements. Rosa threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm, planning a feast and decorating the main house. The ranch hands were equally excited, and several of them offered to help build an arbor for the ceremony. Caroline continued teaching both the ranch hands and Jacob, though their private lessons now often included more kissing than actual studying. She felt guilty about this at first, but Jacob assured her that he was learning more about life and love than any book could teach him. One morning in early July, Caroline was in the schoolroom preparing for the day's lesson when a knock at the door interrupted her. She opened it to find a well-dressed man in his 50s standing outside, his expensive suit and gold watch chain marking him as someone of means. "Miss Webb, my name is Charles Morrison. I'm a businessman from Santa Fe and I've come to make you an offer." Caroline frowned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, but I'm not looking for other employment. I'm very happy here. Please hear me out," Morrison said smoothly. "I'm opening a private school in Santa Fe, a proper academy for children of wealthy families. I've heard excellent things about your teaching abilities from several sources, and I'd like to offer you a position as headmistress. The salary would be $200 a month, plus a house and full expenses. You'd have complete control over the curriculum and teaching staff. It's an opportunity most teachers only dream of." Caroline stared at him, shocked. $200 a month was a fortune, 4 times what Jacob was paying her. As headmistress of a private academy, she would have prestige, security, and professional recognition. It was exactly the kind of position she had once imagined for herself. "That's very generous, Mr. Morrison, but I'm engaged to be married. My life is here now." Morrison's expression did not change. "I understand congratulations are in order. But Miss Webb, please consider carefully before turning down this opportunity. You're a talented educator with a bright future ahead of you. Are you really willing to throw that away to be a rancher's wife? Think about what you'll be giving up. Your career, your independence, your chance to make a real difference in the world. Out here, you'll be just another ranch wife, teaching cowboys to read in the evenings. In Santa Fe, you could shape the education of hundreds of children and establish yourself as a respected professional." His words struck at Caroline's deepest insecurities, the ones she had been trying to ignore. Was she making a mistake? Was she giving up too much for love? She had fought so hard for her independence and her career. Was she really willing to surrender it all? "I need time to think about this," Caroline said, her voice unsteady. "Of course. I'll be staying in Santa Fe for the next 2 weeks. Send word when you've made your decision." Morrison tipped his hat and left, leaving Caroline standing in the doorway with her mind in turmoil. She did not tell Jacob about Morrison's offer that day, or the next. She tried to focus on wedding preparations and her teaching, but the opportunity kept circling in her mind like a hawk. $200 a month, headmistress of a prestigious academy, professional recognition and security, everything she had once wanted. But when she imagined leaving the ranch, leaving Jacob, leaving the life they were building together, she felt physically ill. Was professional success worth that price? On the 3rd day after Morrison's visit, Caroline was sitting by her favorite creek trying to sort through her feelings when Jacob found her. He dismounted from his horse and sat down beside her without saying anything, just taking her hand in his. "Something's been bothering you," Jacob said finally. "I can tell. Do you want to talk about it?" Caroline took a deep breath and told him everything: Morrison's offer, the salary, the opportunity, and her conflicting feelings. As she spoke, she watched Jacob's face, trying to read his reaction. He listened quietly, his expression grave but not angry. When she finished, Jacob was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "That's an incredible opportunity, Caroline. If you want to take it, I understand." "You understand," Caroline repeated, confused. "Jacob, we're engaged to be married in 3 weeks. I know. And I love you more than anything in this world, but I won't trap you in a life you don't want. If you need to pursue this career opportunity, if being a headmistress in Santa Fe is what will make you truly happy, then I won't stand in your way." Jacob's voice was steady, but Caroline could see the pain in his eyes. "I want you to choose me because you want this life, not because you feel obligated or because you're giving up your dreams." "What if I can't choose?" Caroline whispered. "What if I want both?" "Then we find a compromise," Jacob said simply. "Maybe you take the position, but we get married anyway, and you commute to Santa Fe a few days a week. Maybe we move to Santa Fe and I hire a foreman to run the ranch. Maybe we figure out something else entirely. The details don't matter, Caroline. What matters is that we're together." Caroline looked at this man who loved her enough to let her go, who valued her happiness over his own, and in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty what she wanted. "I don't need to compromise," Caroline said. "I don't want the job in Santa Fe. I want this, Jacob. I want you, and I want this ranch, and I want the life we're building together. Teaching your ranch hands to read means more to me than running some fancy academy for rich children. You've taught me something important over these past months." "What's that?" "You've taught me that love isn't about giving up who you are. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. Before I came here, I thought independence meant being alone, being completely self-sufficient. But true independence is choosing your own path, even if that path includes partnership and compromise and building something with someone else. I choose you, Jacob, not because I have to, but because I want to, because you make me happier than any job ever could." Jacob's face broke into a smile so radiant it took her breath away. He pulled her into his arms and held her tightly, and Caroline could feel his heart pounding against her chest. "Are you sure?" Jacob asked, his voice muffled against her hair. "I don't want you to regret this later." "I'm sure," Caroline said firmly. "I'll write to Mr. Morrison today and decline his offer." That evening, Caroline composed a polite letter to Charles Morrison thanking him for the opportunity, but explaining that she had other commitments. As she sealed the envelope, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had made her choice, and it was the right one. The wedding took place on a perfect July afternoon beneath an arbor decorated with wildflowers. Caroline wore a simple white dress that Rosa had helped her sew, and Jacob wore a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome. The ceremony was performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through the area, and every ranch hand attended, along with Rosa and Pete and several neighbors from surrounding ranches. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed Caroline with such tenderness and joy that several people in the audience wiped tears from their eyes. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Tom gave a speech about how Caroline had taught them all more than just reading and writing. She had taught them the value of education and self-improvement. Several other men spoke as well, their words sincere if awkwardly delivered, and Caroline felt overwhelmed by the affection and respect these rough cowboys had developed for her. As the party wound down and guests began drifting away, Jacob took Caroline's hand and led her toward the main house. She had moved her belongings there earlier in the day, and the thought of finally being alone with her husband made her pulse race. Jacob's bedroom, now their bedroom, was large and comfortable, with a big bed covered in a colorful quilt and windows that looked out over the valley. He closed the door behind them and turned to face her, suddenly looking nervous. "I've never done this before," Jacob admitted. "I mean, I want to be with you, but I want to do it right. I don't want to hurt you or rush you or—" Caroline crossed the room and placed her finger on his lips, silencing him. We'll figure it out together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Learning together." She reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers trembling slightly. Jacob covered her hands with his, stilling them. "Caroline, I love you," he said solemnly. "I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Caroline whispered. "I love you too, Jacob. Now stop talking and kiss your wife." Jacob laughed and did exactly that, and the night that followed was tender and passionate, and everything Caroline had dreamed marriage could be. They learned each other's bodies slowly, with patience and care and growing confidence, until finally they came together in a union that felt both physical and spiritual, a joining of not just bodies but souls. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Jacob's arms wrapped around Caroline as she rested her head on his chest. She could hear his heart beating, steady and strong, and she felt more at peace than she ever had in her life. Happy. Jacob murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Incredibly," Caroline said, "though I never imagined my wedding night would be in a ranch house in the middle of New Mexico territory." "Is that a complaint?" "Not even a little bit. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." The months that followed were among the happiest of Caroline's life. She continued teaching the ranch hands in the evenings, and several of them were now reading books for pleasure and writing regular letters to family members. Tom had reconnected with a sister he had not spoken to in 15 years, all because he could now read her letters and write responses. Another young cowboy named Billy had started keeping a journal, and he showed Caroline excerpts sometimes, shy but proud of his improving skills. Jacob continued his lessons as well, though they met less frequently now that they were married. Caroline treasured those mornings when they sat together reading poetry or discussing philosophy, their minds engaging while their hands found each other beneath the table. Jacob's education had advanced remarkably, and he could now read complex texts with ease and write eloquently about his thoughts and feelings. In September, Caroline missed her monthly courses and realized with a mixture of joy and trepidation that she was pregnant. She told Jacob that evening after dinner, pulling him into their bedroom and closing the door for privacy. "I have something to tell you," Caroline said, taking his hands in hers. "Jacob, I'm going to have a baby. We're going to be parents." Jacob's face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, confusion, then pure elation. He let out a whoop of joy and picked Caroline up, spinning her around before remembering her condition and setting her down very carefully. "Are you sure? When? How do you feel? Do you need to see a doctor? Should you stop teaching?" The questions tumbled out one after another. Caroline laughed. "Yes, I'm sure. Probably late April or early May. I feel fine, just a little tired. And yes, I'll see a doctor, but there's one who visits the area regularly. And no, I'm not stopping teaching. Women have been having babies and working for thousands of years, Jacob. I'm not fragile." I know, Jacob said, though he looked unconvinced. "I just want to make sure you're safe and healthy." "We will be," Caroline assured him. "Both of us." Jacob placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach, his expression full of wonder. "Our baby, I can't believe it. We're going to be parents." Over the following months, as Caroline's belly grew, Jacob became almost comically protective. He tried to forbid her from riding horses, climbing stairs quickly, or lifting anything heavier than a book. Caroline endured his fussing with patient amusement, gently reminding him that pregnancy was not an illness, and she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities with reasonable modifications. The ranch hands were equally excited about the baby. Rosa immediately began knitting tiny clothes, and several of the men started building a cradle in their spare time. Even Tom, the gruff old cowboy, was caught whittling a small wooden horse for the baby one evening. "Never had kids of my own," Tom admitted when Caroline thanked him for the gift. "This'll be like having a grandchild. Whole ranch feels like family now, thanks to you." Winter came to New Mexico, bringing cooler temperatures, though nothing like the harsh winters Caroline remembered from Philadelphia. She continued teaching through December, finally stopping in January when climbing the steps to the schoolroom became too difficult. She hated giving up even temporarily, but Jacob and Rosa had both insisted, and Caroline had to admit she was exhausted by the end of each day. She spent her days reading, sewing baby clothes with Rosa's help, and taking short walks around the ranch when weather permitted. Jacob barely left her side when he was not working, and in the evenings, he would read aloud to her from their favorite books while she rested with her swollen feet elevated on pillows. In late April, on a warm spring afternoon, Caroline felt the first contractions. Rosa immediately took charge, sending one of the ranch hands to fetch the doctor from Santa Fe and ushering Caroline into the bedroom. Jacob paced outside the door, looking more terrified than Caroline had ever seen him. Labor lasted through the night and into the following day. Caroline had known it would be difficult, but nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of the pain and the overwhelming physical effort required. Rosa stayed with her throughout, offering encouragement and cool water while the doctor monitored Caroline's progress. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith on the second day, Caroline gave one last tremendous push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. The doctor held up a squirming, red-faced infant with a full head of dark hair. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, "and he's got a fine set of lungs on him." They cleaned the baby and placed him in Caroline's arms, and she stared down at the tiny, perfect face in wonder. He had Jacob's dark hair and her nose, and when he opened his eyes, they were slate blue, the color all babies were born with but which might change to either of his parents' colors. "He's perfect," Caroline whispered. The door burst open and Jacob rushed in, ignoring the doctor's protests. He stopped beside the bed, staring at his wife and son with an expression of absolute awe. "Caroline, he's beautiful, you're amazing, I can't believe we made this perfect little person." Jacob reached out a tentative finger and the baby immediately grasped it with his tiny fist. "He's so strong." "What should we name him?" Caroline asked. They had discussed names for months without reaching a decision. But now, looking at her son, Caroline knew exactly what his name should be. "Thomas," she said, "after your ranch hand who showed me that it's never too late to learn and change. If our son grows up to be half the man Tom is, we'll be lucky." Jacob's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Hartley, I love it." When Tom learned the baby was named after him, the old cowboy cried openly and declared it the greatest honor of his life. He became the baby's most devoted guardian, often sitting in the rocking chair in the main house holding Thomas while Caroline rested or attended to other tasks. As spring turned to summer, life on the Double H settled into a new rhythm. Caroline slowly regained her strength and began teaching again, though now she held lessons only 3 times a week instead of every evening. Jacob had hired 2 additional ranch hands, allowing the others more free time, and several of them used that time to continue their education. The schoolroom was in use almost every evening now, with different men coming in to practice their reading and writing or to work through more advanced materials. Thomas grew rapidly, a healthy, happy baby who seemed to charm everyone he met. He had Jacob's intense blue eyes, which had darkened from their newborn slate to the same startling shade as his father's, and Caroline's smile. The whole ranch doted on him, and he was never short of willing arms to hold him or voices to sing him lullabies. One evening in late August, Caroline was sitting on the porch of the main house with Thomas sleeping in her arms while Jacob sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. The sun was setting in a glory of orange and gold, and cattle called to each other in the distant pastures. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had taken that job in Santa Fe?" Jacob asked quietly. Caroline considered the question. A year ago, she might have wondered and worried about the path not taken. But now, looking at her husband and son, thinking about the life they had built together, she felt no regrets whatsoever. "No," she said simply. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Teaching at some fancy academy could never compare to this." I've got you, I've got Thomas, I've got my work here with the ranch hands. I'm happier than I ever imagined possible. I'm glad, Jacob said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Because I can't imagine my life without you. You've changed everything, Caroline. Before you came, I was just going through the motions, running the ranch because it was what I was supposed to do. But you taught me how to really live, how to love, how to see the value in things I had taken for granted. You didn't just teach me to read better, you taught me how to open my heart. Caroline turned to kiss him properly, careful not to wake the baby in her arms. You taught me plenty too. You taught me that love doesn't mean losing yourself, it means finding yourself in someone else. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person. And you taught me that the greatest adventures aren't about traveling to distant places, they're about building a life with someone you love. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Caroline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. When she had received that telegram more than a year ago, she had thought she was simply taking a teaching position at her remote ranch. She had never imagined she would find a home, a family, and a love that would transform her entire understanding of what it meant to be happy. The ranch hands had learned to read and write, exceeding her expectations in their dedication and progress. But she had learned something far more valuable from them and from Jacob. That teaching was not just about books and letters. It was about changing lives and opening minds and helping people become the best versions of themselves. And love was not about sacrifice or compromise. It was about growth and partnership and choosing to build something beautiful together. As autumn arrived and Thomas celebrated his 6-month birthday, Caroline began teaching full-time again. Rosa had offered to watch the baby during lessons, and Thomas seemed perfectly content to be passed around among his many admirers at the ranch. Caroline marveled at how the rough cowboys transformed into gentle nursemaids around her son, speaking in soft voices and making silly faces to earn his giggles. One of the younger ranch hands, Billy, had made such progress in his reading and writing that Caroline suggested he might consider becoming a teacher himself someday. The idea seemed to astonish Billy, who had never imagined he could be anything other than a cowboy, but Caroline could see the seed taking root in his mind. "You're a natural teacher, Billy," Caroline told him after one lesson where he had helped another student with a difficult passage. "You're patient and encouraging, and you remember what it was like to struggle with this material. That makes you better equipped to help others than someone who found it easy." "You really think I could do it?" Billy asked, his young face hopeful. "I know you could. Keep working on your education, and when you're ready, I'll help you prepare for the teaching examination. New Mexico Territory needs good teachers, especially people who understand the lives of working folks." The conversation with Billy sparked an idea in Caroline's mind. Over dinner that evening, she shared her thoughts with Jacob. "What if we expanded the school?" Caroline said, her excitement growing as she spoke. "Not just for the ranch hands, but for children and adults from neighboring ranches and even from Santa Fe. We could build a proper schoolhouse and bring in additional teachers. There's such a need for education out here, Jacob. I see it every day." Jacob listened thoughtfully, nodding as she spoke. "It's a good idea. We have the land and the resources. And I know several neighboring ranchers who have expressed interest in education for their workers and families." He paused, then smiled. "My mother would have loved this idea. She always believed education was the key to a better life." "Tell me about her," Caroline said softly. Jacob rarely spoke of his mother, and Caroline had learned not to push, but she was curious about the woman who had instilled in Jacob his love of learning. Jacob was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant with memory. Her name was Elizabeth. "She came from Boston, met my father when he was back east buying cattle. She was educated, cultured, everything you would expect from a proper Boston lady. Everyone thought she was crazy to marry a rancher and move to New Mexico Territory, but she did it anyway. She used to say that love made her brave," he smiled sadly. "She tried so hard to bring culture and learning to this wild place. She taught me to read and write, made me study history and literature and mathematics. She had plans to start a school, actually, similar to what you're suggesting. But then she got sick. Pneumonia. The doctor couldn't do anything, and she died within a week. I was 12, and I felt like my whole world ended. Caroline reached across the table and took his hand. I'm so sorry, Jacob. Losing a parent is hard at any age, but 12 is particularly difficult. My father wasn't the same after she died. He threw himself into ranch work, barely spoke for months. He never remarried, never seemed to want companionship again. I think he felt like loving her and losing her was more pain than he could bear. Jacob squeezed Caroline's hand. For a long time, I thought he was right. I thought it was safer not to love anyone too deeply, to keep people at a distance. And then you arrived with your trunks of books and your determination to teach a bunch of illiterate cowboys, and you turned my whole world upside down. I'm glad I did, Caroline said, blinking back tears. And Jacob, if we build this school, we should name it after your mother, the Elizabeth Hartley School. It seems fitting since this was her dream too. Jacob's face transformed with emotion, and Caroline saw tears spill down his cheeks. She would have loved you so much, Caroline. You're everything she hoped I would find. Intelligent, passionate, brave. Thank you for honoring her memory this way. Plans for the school began in earnest. Jacob donated 5 acres of land near the ranch house, and several neighboring ranchers contributed money and materials for construction. Billy and 3 other ranch hands who had shown aptitude and interest enrolled in an intensive teaching program that Caroline designed, working with them in the mornings before regular ranch work began. Caroline wrote to educational institutions back east requesting textbooks and teaching materials, and to her delight, several responded with donations. Word of the Elizabeth Hartley School spread throughout the territory, and Caroline received letters from prospective students and their families, all eager for the opportunity to receive an education. Construction on the school building began in the spring of 1879, just as Thomas celebrated his first birthday. The little boy was walking now, toddling around the ranch with determined steps and getting into everything with the curiosity typical of his age. He had a special love for horses and would stand at the corral fence for hours watching the animals, chattering in his own incomprehensible language. He's going to be a rancher like his father, Tom predicted one afternoon, watching Thomas point excitedly at a chestnut mare. Or maybe he'll be a teacher like his mother, Caroline countered. Or maybe he'll be something entirely different. He's got time to figure it out. The school building was completed in late summer, a handsome structure of adobe and wood with 2 large classrooms, a small office for Caroline, and a library that would house her growing collection of books. On the day they hung the sign reading Elizabeth Hartley School, Jacob stood staring at it for a long time, his hand in Caroline's. She would be so proud, he said quietly. Not just of the school, but of you, of us, of everything we've built here. The school opened in September with 30 students ranging in age from 6 to 60. Billy and 2 other former ranch hands served as assistant teachers, and Caroline hired a young woman from Santa Fe named Margaret to help with the younger children. The first day was chaotic but exhilarating, with students filling the classrooms and eager voices asking questions and sharing excitement about learning. Caroline stood at the front of the main classroom, looking at the diverse group of students before her, cowboys and farmers and shopkeepers and their children, all united by their desire for education, and felt a profound sense of purpose and fulfillment. This was what she was meant to do, not teaching wealthy children in some prestigious academy, but bringing education to people who needed it most, who would use it to improve their lives and their communities. That evening, after the students had left and the building was quiet, Jacob found Caroline sitting at her desk, sorting through lesson plans for the following day. Thomas was asleep in a basket in the corner, worn out from a day of exploring the new building under Rosa's watchful eye. "You did it," Jacob said, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and a smile on his face. You built something amazing here. We did it, Caroline corrected. None of this would have been possible without your support and resources, and it's really your mother's achievement. We're just fulfilling her vision. Jacob crossed the room and pulled Caroline to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. I love you so much. Do you know that? Every day I think I can't possibly love you more than I already do, and every day you prove me wrong. I love you too, Caroline said, resting her head against his chest. Thank you for believing in me, for supporting my work, for being the most wonderful husband and father. I never knew I could be this happy. Neither did I, Jacob admitted. Before you came, I was just existing, not really living. You taught me how to open my heart, how to love without fear, how to dream bigger than just running a ranch. You taught me that life is about more than just survival. It's about creating something meaningful and sharing it with people you care about. They stood there in the quiet schoolroom, holding each other while their sons slept peacefully nearby, and Caroline thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come to the Double H Ranch to teach cowboys how to read, but in the process, she had discovered that the greatest lessons were not found in books. Jacob had learned to love, and she had learned that love did not diminish independence, it enhanced it. Together they had built something beautiful. A family, a school, a community united by education and mutual respect. Over the next several years, the Elizabeth Hartley School flourished. More students enrolled each semester, and Caroline hired additional teachers to handle the growing numbers. Several of her original students, including Billy and Tom, became teachers themselves, spreading education throughout the territory. The school gained a reputation for excellence, and visitors came from as far away as Colorado and Arizona to observe Caroline's teaching methods and curriculum. Jacob expanded the ranch as well, buying additional land and cattle and employing more workers. But he never forgot the importance of education, and he made sure every ranch hand who wanted to attend school had the time and resources to do so. The Double H became known not just as a successful ranch, but as a place where workers were valued and given opportunities for advancement. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved books as much as he loved horses. At age 5, he was reading simple texts on his own and demanding stories every night before bed. Caroline and Jacob often found him in the school library, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a pile of books around him, completely absorbed in whatever tale he was discovering. He has your love of learning, Jacob said one evening, watching Thomas through the library window. And your sense of justice and fairness, Caroline replied. He's the best of both of us. When Thomas was 6, Caroline discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with excitement rather than surprise, and Thomas declared that he wanted a baby sister. Jacob hoped for another boy, but he assured Caroline he would be thrilled with whatever they had. As long as you and the baby are healthy, that's all that matters, Jacob said, his hand resting on Caroline's stomach. The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Caroline knew what to expect this time. She continued teaching until her 8th month, then reluctantly turned her classes over to her assistant teachers. Thomas was fascinated by his mother's growing belly and talked to the baby constantly, telling elaborate stories about all the things they would do together once the baby was born. In February of 1882, on a cold but clear night, Caroline gave birth to a daughter. The labor was shorter than Thomas's had been, only 12 hours from first contraction to final push. When the doctor placed the tiny girl in Caroline's arms, she felt the same overwhelming rush of love she had experienced with Thomas. She's beautiful, Jacob whispered, touching his daughter's soft cheek with one finger. She looks like you. She has your nose, Caroline said, laughing. And I think she's going to have your hair. Thomas was allowed into the room shortly after the birth, and he approached the bed cautiously, his eyes wide with wonder at the sight of his baby sister. She's so small, Thomas said. Is she going to break? No, she's very strong, just like you were when you were born, Caroline assured him. Would you like to hold her? With Jacob's help, Thomas carefully held his sister for the first time, his face serious with concentration. I'm going to teach her everything, Thomas announced. Reading and riding horses and how to find the best hiding spots on the ranch. I'm going to be the best big brother ever. I know you will, Caroline said, her heart full to bursting with love for her family. They named the baby Elizabeth, after Jacob's mother, with Caroline's mother's name, Anne, as her middle name. Little Lizzie, as they quickly began calling her, was a calm baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with dark, intelligent eyes. She looked remarkably like the portrait of Jacob's mother that hung in the main house, with delicate features and an expression of quiet determination. Tom declared himself Lizzie's official protector, just as he had been with Thomas, and could often be found sitting on the porch rocking the baby while he read aloud from one of his favorite books. The old cowboy was now nearly 60 and had officially retired from active ranch work, but he still helped around the Double H in various ways, particularly with the school. Never thought I'd live to see the day when I could read Shakespeare to a baby, Tom said one afternoon, gently bouncing Lizzie on his knee while reciting passages from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Your mama taught me that, little one. Taught me that learning never stops and it's never too late to change your life. Caroline, watching from the doorway, felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she had dreamed of creating, a community built on education and mutual support, where knowledge was valued and shared freely, where people helped each other grow and succeed. As the years passed, life on the Double H continued to flourish. The Elizabeth Hartley School expanded again, adding a third classroom and enrolling students from increasingly distant locations. Some families even moved to the area specifically so their children could attend the school, and a small town began to develop nearby with a general store, a church, and several other businesses. Thomas entered the school formally at age 7 and proved to be an excellent student with his mother's aptitude for language and his father's practical intelligence. He excelled at mathematics and science, but he also loved literature and could often be found reading adventure novels about far-off places and daring exploits. Lizzie grew into a spirited, intelligent girl who inherited her father's intensity and her mother's determination. At age 5, she demanded to be allowed to attend school with her brother, and when Caroline tried to explain that she was too young, Lizzie demonstrated that she could already read simple books and write her letters. Caroline relented, and Lizzie became the youngest student ever admitted to the Elizabeth Hartley School. Jacob remained a devoted husband and father, somehow managing to run a successful ranch while also making time for his family. He continued his own education as well, reading voraciously and engaging Caroline in discussions about history, politics, and philosophy. Their private morning lessons had evolved into intellectual partnerships, with both of them learning from and challenging each other. One evening in the spring of 1886, Caroline and Jacob were sitting on their porch watching the sunset, as had become their custom. Thomas, now 10, was in the barn with some of the ranch hands, learning about horse breeding. Lizzie, age 4, was supposed to be in bed, but was almost certainly reading by lamplight instead, a habit Caroline chose not to discourage despite Jacob's concerns about her eyesight. You remember when we first met? Jacob asked, taking Caroline's hand in his. You climbed down from Pete's wagon looking dusty and determined, and I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I remember thinking you were nothing like I expected, Caroline said with a smile. I pictured someone old and weathered, and instead, you were young and handsome and intense. Those blue eyes of yours nearly made me forget how to speak. And now here we are, 8 years later, with 2 children and a school and a life I never could have imagined. Jacob lifted her hand and kissed it gently. Thank you for choosing me, Caroline. Thank you for teaching me how to love. You taught me just as much, Caroline said. You taught me that love doesn't mean losing yourself, it means becoming more fully yourself. You taught me that the greatest adventure isn't traveling to distant places. It's building a life with someone who challenges you and supports you and loves you unconditionally. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors as the sun sank below the horizon. Caroline thought about the telegram that had arrived 8 years ago, offering her a teaching position at a remote ranch. She had accepted because she needed the money and had no other options, but it had turned out to be the best decision of her life. She had come to teach cowboys how to read, but in the process, she had discovered her true calling. Not just teaching literacy, but teaching people to dream bigger, to believe in their potential, to understand that education could transform lives. And Jacob, the man who had hired her to teach his ranch hands, had ended up teaching her the most important lesson of all: how to love without fear, how to trust in partnership, how to build something meaningful and lasting with another person. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Caroline leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder and felt profoundly grateful for the journey that had brought her here. She had found not just love and family, but purpose and belonging. The wild New Mexico territory had become her home, the Double H Ranch had become her heart, and the man beside her had become her everything. "I love you, Jacob Hartley," Caroline said softly. "I love you too, Caroline Hartley," Jacob replied, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. Forever and always. And as the night settled around them, full of stars and promise and the quiet sounds of the ranch they had built together, Caroline knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be. She had taught Jacob and his ranch hands how to read, but in return, they had taught her something far more valuable: how to open her heart to love, to community, and to a future full of endless possibilities. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of life on a working ranch. Thomas grew into a thoughtful teenager who spent his mornings working alongside his father and his afternoons studying in the school library. At 15, he announced that he wanted to attend university back east to study engineering. The decision was bittersweet for Caroline and Jacob, proud of their son's ambition but sad at the thought of him leaving. "It's what my mother wanted for me," Jacob said quietly one night after Thomas had gone to bed. "She wanted me to have opportunities beyond this ranch. I never got that chance, but our son will, that's all that matters." "He'll come back," Caroline assured him. "The ranch is in his blood just like it's in yours. He'll get his education and then he'll come home and use what he's learned to make the Double H even better." Caroline was right. Thomas left for university in 1888, but returned every summer, bringing new ideas and innovations that he and Jacob implemented on the ranch. He graduated with honors in 1892 and came home permanently, ready to help his father run the operation and expand it with modern techniques and equipment. Lizzie, meanwhile, showed no interest in leaving New Mexico. She loved the ranch and the school with fierce devotion, and by age 12, she was already assisting with teaching the younger students. She had her father's gift with horses and her mother's gift with words, and she moved through the world with a confidence that both amazed and intimidated people who met her. "She's going to change the world, that one," Tom said one day, watching 14-year-old Lizzie lead a group of students on a nature walk, pointing out plants and rock formations and explaining the geology of the region. "She's got that same fire your mother had, Jacob. Nothing's going to stop her." Tom was 92 now, still sharp-minded but increasingly frail. He spent most of his days on the porch of the main house, reading and watching ranch life unfold around him. He had become a beloved fixture of the community, and children from the school visited him regularly to hear his stories about the old days, before Caroline arrived and everything changed. One warm afternoon in October of 1892, Caroline found Tom on the porch, a book open on his lap but his eyes closed. At first she thought he was sleeping, but when she drew closer, she realized he had passed away peacefully, probably sometime in the past hour based on how he felt when she touched his hand. Tears streamed down Caroline's face as she sat beside him, holding his weathered hand one last time. Tom had been one of her first students, one of her greatest success stories, and one of her dearest friends. He had lived to 92 years old, had reconnected with family because of his newfound literacy, had become a teacher himself, and had died surrounded by the community he loved. The funeral was attended by nearly 200 people, testament to the impact Tom had made on the community. Jacob gave the eulogy, his voice rough with emotion as he talked about Tom's loyalty, his wisdom, and his courage in being willing to learn despite his initial resistance. "Tom was the best of us," Jacob said, looking out at the assembled mourners. "He showed us that it's never too late to change, never too late to learn, never too late to become who you were meant to be. He taught us about dignity and perseverance and the importance of keeping an open mind. We named our son after this man, and I hope Thomas grows up to be half as good a person as the man who inspired his name." They buried Tom on a hillside overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Thomas Tom McKenna, 1800–1892, teacher and friend." Caroline planted wildflowers on the grave, the same kind that had been in the vase in her cottage when she first arrived all those years ago. Life continued, as it always does, with seasons changing and children growing and the ranch thriving. The Elizabeth Hartley School celebrated its 15th anniversary in 1894, with a grand celebration attended by dignitaries from across the territory, including the territorial governor. Caroline, now 42 years old, had become a respected figure in educational circles, and she received regular invitations to speak at conferences and training sessions for new teachers. Thomas married a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch in 1895, and they built a house on the Double H property. A year later, Caroline and Jacob became grandparents to a baby boy named Jacob Thomas, called Jay by everyone. Holding her grandson for the first time, Caroline marveled at how life had come full circle. "Your grandmother Elizabeth would have loved this," Caroline told Jacob as they watched Thomas and Sarah with baby Jay. "4 generations of Hartleys on this ranch." "3 generations of teachers too," Jacob added, nodding toward Lizzie, who at 17 was now teaching full-time at the Elizabeth Hartley School and had already implemented several innovative teaching methods that were gaining attention throughout the territory. "Our daughter's going to surpass even you, Caroline. She's remarkable." Lizzie did indeed prove to be remarkable. She expanded the school's curriculum to include practical skills alongside traditional academics, teaching students about ranching, farming, business management, and domestic economy. She fought for better educational opportunities for Mexican and Native American children, often facing opposition from narrow-minded community members, but never backing down from what she believed was right. "She reminds me of you when you first arrived," Jacob told Caroline one evening. "So determined to make a difference, so unwilling to accept limitations or injustice. I'm incredibly proud of her." "So am I," Caroline agreed. "Sometimes I look at our children and I can hardly believe Jacob and I created these amazing humans. They're so much better than we ever were." "They're products of the life we built together," Jacob said. "They grew up in a home filled with love and learning, in a community that values education and fairness. Of course they're remarkable. They had remarkable parents." As the new century approached, Caroline found herself reflecting on the nearly 20 years since she had arrived at the Double H Ranch. She had come as a young woman of 26, uncertain of her future and carrying only her books and her determination. Now she was 45 years old, a wife, mother, grandmother, and respected educator who had transformed not just a ranch but an entire community. The Elizabeth Hartley School had over 100 students now, with 5 full-time teachers and plans to expand again. Former students had gone on to become teachers, lawyers, doctors, business people, and community leaders throughout New Mexico territory. The ripple effects of that first reading lesson, taught to 12 nervous cowboys in the cookhouse, had spread far beyond anything Caroline could have imagined. Jacob, now 47, had gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the bright New Mexico sun. But he was still strong and vital, still running the ranch with the same dedication and fairness that had always characterized his leadership. He and Thomas worked together seamlessly now, father and son united in their vision for the double HTK's future. On New Year's Eve of 1899, the entire extended family gathered at the main house to celebrate the turn of the century. Thomas and Sarah were there with little Jay, now 3 years old. Lizzie had brought her beau, a young teacher named Daniel who worked at the school and clearly adored her. Rosa, now in her 60s, presided over the feast she had prepared with her usual skill. Several longtime ranch hands joined the celebration, men who had been Caroline's students in those early days and who had become like family over the years. As midnight approached, Jacob stood and called for everyone's attention. "I want to propose a toast," he said, raising his glass. 21 years ago, I sent a telegram to Santa Fe requesting a teacher for my ranch hands. It was one of the smartest decisions I ever made, though I had no idea at the time just how much that decision would change everything. He turned to look at Caroline, and she saw the love and admiration shining in his blue eyes, as bright as the day they had married. Caroline came here to teach cowboys how to read, but she ended up teaching all of us something far more important. She taught us how to dream, how to believe in ourselves, how to build something meaningful. And she taught me, personally, how to love without fear, how to open my heart, how to be the man my mother hoped I would become. Jacob's voice grew thick with emotion. "So I propose a toast to Caroline, to our family, to this ranch, and to the Elizabeth Hartley School. May the next century bring even more growth, more learning, and more love. And may we never forget the lessons we've learned about the transformative power of education and the strength that comes from believing in each other." Everyone raised their glasses and echoed the toast. As the clock struck midnight and the new century began, Caroline stood surrounded by the family and community she had helped build, and felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. She caught Jacob's eye across the room and smiled, remembering the young rancher who had hired her all those years ago, the man who claimed he did not need lessons, but who had learned the most important one: how to love. Years continued to pass with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing. Lizzie married her teacher beau Daniel in 1902, and they took over primary management of the Elizabeth Hartley School together, implementing new programs and expanding the curriculum even further. Caroline, now 50, stepped back from daily teaching but remained involved in curriculum development and teacher training. Thomas and Sarah had 2 more children, daughters named Elizabeth and Mary, giving Caroline and Jacob 3 grandchildren to spoil and love. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, with Jacob gradually transitioning into a more advisory role as his son's skills and confidence grew. In 1905, New Mexico Territory officially recognized the Elizabeth Hartley School as a model institution, and Caroline was invited to the territorial capital to receive an award for her contributions to education. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, including many of her former students who had traveled from across the territory to honor the woman who had changed their lives. One of those former students was Billy, now in his 40s and serving as superintendent of schools for 3 counties. He gave a speech about Caroline's impact that left hardly a dry eye in the audience. "Miss Caroline, as we all still call her, taught us more than reading and writing," Billy said. "She taught us that we mattered, that our lives had value, that we deserved opportunities to grow and succeed. She saw potential in rough, uneducated cowboys that no one else saw. She believed in us before we believed in ourselves. Everything I've accomplished in my life, I owe to her and to the foundation she gave me all those years ago in a converted storage shed on the Double H Ranch." Caroline accepted the award with grace and humility, but in her acceptance speech, she made sure to credit Jacob, Tom, and all the ranch hands who had been willing to learn despite their fears and doubts. "I may have been the teacher," Caroline said, "but they taught me just as much. They taught me about courage, determination, and the incredible capacity of the human spirit to grow and change. This award belongs to all of us." That evening, back at the ranch, Caroline and Jacob sat on their porch watching another spectacular sunset. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together at the end of each day, and Caroline treasured it more than any award or recognition. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night so many years ago. "Incredibly," Caroline answered, giving the same response she had given then. "Though I never could have imagined this life when I was a young woman in Philadelphia, struggling to make ends meet and wondering what would become of me." "And if you could go back and tell that young woman what her future held, what would you say?" Caroline thought for a moment. "I'd tell her not to be afraid. I'd tell her that taking that teaching position at a remote ranch in New Mexico territory would be the best decision she ever made. I'd tell her that she would find love and family and purpose beyond her wildest dreams. And I'd tell her that the cowboy who hired her to teach his ranch hands to read would end up teaching her the most valuable lesson of all. That love isn't about losing yourself, it's about finding yourself in someone else." Jacob pulled her close, and they sat together as the sky transformed from blue to orange to purple to black, as stars emerged one by one, as the ranch settled into nighttime quiet. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. The Elizabeth Hartley School would educate generations of children. The Double H Ranch would continue to thrive under Thomas's management. And the love they had shared, the partnership they had forged, would live on in their children and grandchildren. "I love you, Caroline Hartley," Jacob whispered into her hair. "I love you too, Jacob Hartley," Caroline replied, "always and forever." And as the night embraced them, full of stars and promise and the accumulated memories of more than 25 years together, Caroline reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She had come to the Double H Ranch as Caroline Webb, a schoolteacher desperate for employment. She had found Jacob Hartley, a rancher in need of someone to educate his workers. Together, they had built a life that exceeded either of their expectations, a life rich with love, family, community, and purpose. The telegram that arrived in April of 1878 had seemed like a simple job offer, nothing more than a means of survival. But it had been the beginning of everything that truly mattered. The love of her life, the family she had always wanted, the work that fulfilled her soul, and the community that had become her home. She had taught cowboys to read, but in the process, she had learned to truly live. And Jacob, the man who had hired her all those years ago, had not just learned to love. He had taught her what love really meant: partnership, respect, support, and the courage to build something beautiful together. As they sat together under the vast New Mexico sky, surrounded by everything they had created, Caroline knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. This ranch, this man, this life they had built together, this was her great adventure, her greatest achievement, her happily ever after. The story that had begun with a telegram and a dusty wagon ride had unfolded into something extraordinary. A love story, yes, but also a story about education, community, family, and the transformative power of believing in people's potential. And now, as the new century stretched before them full of promise and possibility, Caroline and Jacob faced it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, ready for whatever came next. Their love had started in a Wild West territory, but it had grown into something timeless and universal. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and absolute devotion. Jacob had hired her to teach his ranch hands to read, but she had ended up teaching him how to love, and he had taught her the same in return. And so they lived, happily and contentedly, surrounded by family and community, continuing to make a difference in the world one student, one lesson, one act of love at a time. The Double H Ranch and the Elizabeth Hartley School stood as testaments to what two people could accomplish when they worked together with shared purpose and unwavering commitment. And their love, born in the dusty heat of a New Mexico spring, endured through all the years that followed, a bright constant star in the vast western sky, guiding them home to each other every single day for the rest of their long and blessed lives together.